Mediterranean, Syria, the Balkans, the Caucasus, names that evoke Europe's history and its very borders. But today, in these crucial regions, something is happening that Brussels seems either not to understand or worse, not to want to see. While Europe gets lost in endless meetings, another power is redrawing the map with steel and political will, with military force, with cultural influence, and by using human desperation as a weapon. What we will show you today is not a series of disconnected crises. It is the chronicle of a methodical, calculated transfer of power. And it is happening right here, in Europe's own backyard. The real question, then, is not whether it is happening, but why Europe is paralyzed while its more powerful neighbour rewrites the rules of the game. Welcome to Amazing Europe! For decades, the rules were clear. Europe, sheltered under the American security umbrella, set the political and economic agenda in its neighbourhood. The promise of eventual EU accession was enough to shape the choices of entire nations. But that era is over. If you still think of Turkey as a problematic NATO ally, you are looking at a picture from 10 years ago. Today's reality is far more complex and far more uncomfortable. This video is not about an ally. It is about a genuine strategic competitor. A competitor driven by a clear, ambitious vision and by a leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has identified with surgical precision Europe's greatest vulnerability, its inability to act as a single body, its perpetual indecision. Over the next few minutes, we will analyse how Turkey is methodically exploiting this weakness across the continent's 4 key frontiers. We will decode its moves, one by one, to reveal a coherent long-term strategy in which nothing, absolutely nothing, is left to chance. Our first stop is Libya. Once a crucial energy partner for Europe, today it is a graveyard of European ambitions. After the fall of Gaddafi, the country plunged into a civil war that turned it into a chessboard for foreign powers. Europe, geographically closest and most invested in a solution, proved fatally unable to speak with one voice. Control over migration flows and the security of energy infrastructure were the stakes, but even that was not enough to unite the front. While Italy hesitantly backed the UN-recognised government of national accord in Tripoli, France was unofficially yet materially supporting its rival, General Khalifa Haftar. Two pillars of the European Union found themselves on opposite sides, neutralising each other in a self-destructive game that threw the doors wide open to anyone with a clearer strategy and the will to pursue it. A power vacuum that Erdogan's Turkey did not hesitate to fill. By late 2019, the situation was desperate. Tripoli was on the brink of falling under Haftar's siege, supported by an international front that included Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and, above all, the formidable Russian mercenaries of the Wagner Group. The capital's gates were about to collapse. It was then that Ankara made its move, not with calls for dialogue, but with its most effective weapon, Bayraktar TB2 drones. The skies over Libya filled with these silent, lethal predators. The costly Russian Pantsir air defense systems, once touted as technological pride, were systematically hunted down and destroyed one by one. Haftar's offensive was shattered and his forces forced into a disastrous retreat. But the military victory was only the first act. Erdogan's real masterstroke was the price he demanded in return. He did not ask only for oil or military bases. He asked for a piece of paper, an agreement that would redraw the map of power across the entire eastern Mediterranean. This document, the Maritime Boundary Agreement, draws a straight line linking the coasts of Turkey and Libya, creating an immense exclusive economic zone. It is a geopolitical bombshell. Greece, Cyprus, and the entire European Union condemned it as a blatant violation of international law because it deliberately ignores the existence of whole Greek islands, such as Crete. This bold move has a name, and it lies at the heart of a precise and aggressive doctrine, Mavi Vatan, the Blue Homeland. It is not just a strategy, it is an almost messianic vision. Turkey reclaiming its maritime living space. In Libya, Europe was not merely defeated, it was outplayed in strategic cunning, beaten on a far larger chessboard before it even understood the rules of the new game. We move east, along one of the Near East's most unstable borders, the one with Syria. For Ankara, the Syrian civil war created an existential threat, the strategic nightmare of a Kurdish corridor of terror taking shape on its borders. The primary objective was to prevent the Kurdish YPG militias, considered a direct extension of the PKK terrorist group, from consolidating their territories. The Turkish response was brutal, a series of massive military operations designed to create a deep security zone, a buffer inside Syrian territory effectively administered by Ankara, pushing the militias back and beginning to resettle some refugees, a move widely criticised as demographic engineering. But the real cunning of the Turkish strategy appears when you look at the international context. The YPG, in fact, is the core of the Syrian Democratic Forces, that is, the principal US and European ally on the ground in the fight against ISIS. Here, a geopolitical schizophrenia is revealed that has literally paralyzed the West. On one hand, Washington armed and financed the Kurds as indispensable infantry against ISIS. On the other hand, Ankara, a key NATO member with the alliance's second-largest army, bombed them as terrorists. Europe and the United States were trapped in an impossible dilemma: support their ally on the ground, the Kurds, or their strategic ally, Turkey? Unable to choose, and therefore unable to act with a single voice, they did the worst thing possible: nothing. It was precisely this paralysis that gave Erdogan immense freedom of action. It turned Turkey into the swing power, negotiating directly with the other on-the-ground superpower, Russia. While Brussels was reduced to the role of spectator, Erdogan was at the table with Putin, deciding the fate of the conflict. And here comes the real twist. The situation in Syria produced millions of refugees seeking entry into Europe. The European Union panicked and struck a deal with Turkey. In exchange for €6 billion, Ankara would stop the flow of refugees. Each of us may have views on whether it was right to stop those migrants or whether it would have been better to help them. But whatever our opinion, it does not change an important fact. By signing this agreement, the European Union demonstrated to Turkey that it could be blackmailed. Europe did not pay for a solution. It paid to surrender control. It handed Erdogan a switch, a tap he can open or close at will, using the nearly 4 million refugees on his territory as the most powerful leverage. When Europe criticizes Ankara, the response is always the same. We can open the gates.
Avrupa Birliği sözünde durması lazım. Biz kapıları açmak zorunda kalacağız.
And the fact that he was not bluffing was proved in March 2020, when he pushed thousands of migrants toward the Greek border in scenes of orchestrated desperation.
Ve biz de dün ne yaptık? Kapıları açtık ve biz bu kapıları bundan sonraki süreçte de kapatmayacağız ve bu devam edecek.
This is the geopolitics of human pressure, a weapon that strikes at the EU's deepest fracture: immigration. A new wave of migration brings frontier countries to their knees, fuels nationalist forces, and collides with the wall of eastern states. Erdogan does not need to attack Europe. He only needs to flip a switch to make it fight itself, exploiting its own divisions to paralyze it. A weapon forged in Syria, aimed squarely at the political foundations of Brussels. We leave the open battlefields to enter a subtler, yet no less important arena: the Western Balkans, Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Serbia. Geographically, they are Europe. Politically, they have been stuck for decades in the European Union's waiting room, frustrated by an accession process that appears endless, bureaucratic, and conditioned by cross-cutting vetoes. The promise of a European future, once immensely powerful, has faded, leaving a void of hope and influence. Into that vacuum, Turkey moves with the agility of one who knows the history and the terrain. Here, Erdogan does not employ drones. Instead, he plays on historical, religious, and economic ties that bureaucratic Brussels has forgotten or underestimated. While Brussels sends assessment missions and reform manuals thousands of pages long, Ankara sends engineers and capital. Turkish firms build highways in Serbia, run the airport in Kosovo, and invest heavily across the region. At the same time, Turkey is conducting a powerful cultural offensive. It funds the restoration of mosques and Ottoman bridges, invoking a shared imperial past. Above all, it floods TV schedules with its popular television series, which export an image of a modern, self-confident Turkey that is conservative in values, a model far closer and more relatable to many Balkan citizens than the Brussels image, perceived as distant. For Muslim populations such as Bosniaks and Albanians, Erdogan positions himself as a protector, a reference leader who speaks directly to their hearts. But the real twist, the move that reveals the depth of this strategy, does not happen in Sarajevo or Tirana. It happens in Düsseldorf, Vienna, Amsterdam. Turkey's true sphere of influence in Europe is its diaspora. Millions of citizens of Turkish origin, especially in Germany, are not just an integrated minority. They are a powerful foreign electoral constituency, loyal to Erdogan, whom he cultivates with massive rallies in European stadiums amid seas of Turkish flags. This is not mere nostalgia. It is a clear demonstration of power directed at European governments. I have direct influence over millions of people who live and vote on your territory. Turkey does not want to replace the EU in the Balkans. It is playing a much longer game. It wants these countries, even once they join the Union, to have Ankara as an alternative point of reference, thereby securing friendly voices within Brussels' decision-making process for decades to come. Our final frontier may seem the most distant, the least connected to our continent, the Caucasus. What does a conflict wedged in the mountains have to do with Brussels' balance of power, you might ask? The answer is everything. And failing to understand it in time was perhaps one of the greatest and most silent strategic failures of modern Europe. For 30 years, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh region remained frozen, a wound managed by international diplomacy, the Minsk Group, in which Europe played a leading role. For decades, we thought that chairing meetings and signing documents would be enough to preserve stability in what we considered a distant periphery. We underestimated the anger, the ambition, and, above all, the arrival of a new technology. In the autumn of 2020, Azerbaijan launched a lightning offensive, buoyed by Turkish support and an arsenal that included drones and Israeli munitions. Bayraktar TB2s dominated the skies, succeeding in neutralizing Armenian defenses, and Europe, which should have been the guarantor of peace, found itself merely an impotent spectator. While its diplomats expressed deep concern, Turkey was changing the reality on the ground. The war ended in 44 days. The ceasefire was not negotiated in Brussels. It was imposed by Moscow and Ankara. Europe was not even invited to the table. But what happened afterward concerns us directly. The real stake was not only that piece of land, it was written into a clause of the peace agreement. The creation of the Zangezur corridor. Here is the plot twist that explains why that conflict matters to us, and, above all, what we concretely lost. This corridor is a geopolitical bombshell. It links Turkey directly to the Caspian Sea for the first time, bypassing Armenia. And that changes everything for us. On the energy front, the southern gas corridor, conceived by Europe to reduce dependence on Russia, effectively falls under Turkish control. We lost negotiating leverage and security, risking the exchange of one dependency for another. On the commercial front, the backbone of a new pan-Turkic Silk Road is born, an axis that connects Asia to the Mediterranean without needing to pass through our ports, eroding our logistical centrality. And where energy and goods flow, power flows. With this move, our political influence in Central Asia is drastically reduced. With a single, short war that we ignored, Turkey began building a future in which the roots of money and power bypass us. That is what it had to do with Europe. Our future. Before we reveal Ankara's true strategy, if you found this video interesting, we kindly ask you to support our project by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the bell so you don't miss our new uploads. We also remind you of our new channel, America vs. Europe, where we rank all European countries, the United States and Canada across various factors. Drones in Libya, refugees at the Greek border, soft power in the Balkans, a strategic corridor in the Caucasus. Seen individually, they look like disconnected incidents. But if we connect them, a precise design emerges. This is not improvisation. It is a grand strategy built on 3 pillars, each of which, by contrast, reveals a fatal weakness of US Europeans. The first pillar is seizing opportunity while Europe endures it. For decades, America guaranteed order in our neighborhood. Now that Washington is pulling back, Turkey sees a power vacuum to be filled assertively. Europe, by contrast, sees only the loss of a protector. While Ankara occupies the space left open, Brussels argues over who should pay for the consequences, unable to develop an autonomous strategic vision of its own. Turkey acts, Europe endures. The second pillar is leveraging historical motivation, while Europe has forgotten it. Erdogan's foreign policy is fueled by a powerful nationalist narrative, revenge for past humiliations and the restoration of imperial greatness. Visions such as the Blue Homeland and the Turkish world are potent engines that justify every action. Europe, instead, struggles to define a unifying identity and purpose. It has replaced a passion for its history with the management of bureaucracy, and today no longer knows how to respond to those who play the game on the level of grand identity narratives. The third and final pillar is developing one's own instruments, while Europe depends on others. By building an autonomous military industry, particularly in drones, Turkey freed itself from Western technological dependence. It moved from buyer to supplier, creating a sphere of influence through drone diplomacy. Europe, by contrast, remains fragmented. It possesses industrial excellence, but not a single defence policy. Its military missions are often underfunded and subject to cross-vetoes, while its member states are increasingly divided and compete with one another to sell arms. On one side, we have an actor that seizes opportunities, is driven by strong ideological motivation, and owns the tools to act. On the other, an actor that reacts to events, lacks a unifying narrative, and struggles to coordinate its means. It is no accident that one is winning and the other is losing. It is the natural consequence of 2 diametrically opposed approaches to the world. For decades, Brussels lived under the illusion of being the only relevant power in its neighbourhood. Money and a winning economic model were enough. Today, that bubble has burst. While Europe lingers over 20th century diplomacy and endless negotiations, a different game is being played on its borders. Erdogan's Turkey has understood the rules of the 21st century: speed, fait accompli, absolute determination. Ankara mobilizes every instrument, military, demographic, cultural, technological, without hesitation. It is as if one player arrived at a chess game with the manual in hand, only to discover that the opponent is redrawing the board while he studies his moves. And the American referee, you ask? He has left the room. Europe relied on reason and procedure. Turkey wins with cunning and strategic vision. To be clear, we are not by any means singing Erdogan's praises. Quite the opposite. We are simply laying out a geopolitical reality that we should recognise as soon as possible. Namely, that in the Mediterranean, the Balkans, the Caucasus, regions Brussels once regarded as its own backyard, it is Ankara that calls the shots today. The era of Europe as the principal actor is over. Today it is one player among many, and not even the most important. So, if we want our Europe to re-emerge, the final question we should all ask ourselves is very simple. What now? What will Europe do while the world around it changes at supersonic speed? What can be done to stop being mere spectators and to become protagonists again? We can't wait to read your opinions in the comments. Since we have often talked about bureaucracy, we recommend you watch this video, where you will discover the 10 European countries with the most oppressive bureaucracy. That's all for this video. See you next time.